Good evening, everyone. Pretty intimidating room for a recovering attorney, but I appreciate everyone being here. One of the attributes and assets of our organization that Ken didn't mention is our Board of Trustees. Ken has been a member of our Board of Trustees for probably close to 20 years, and I see other board members out there. I thank you all for coming. The video that was just shown really puts me in a category when it comes to featured speakers or presenters that I truly don't deserve to be in, and my remarks will probably show that. But I'm delighted to be here, and I'm even more delighted that behind me in the program is an outstanding panel of subject matter experts on medicine and law and ethics, all of whom can correct and otherwise debunk that which I'm going to say, so that no one has to leave with the misimpression of this topic. When the rabbi asked if I would participate, I said yes. It's something of great interest to me, obviously, but frankly, it's kind of beshert, and that's a medical term that means destined. It was kind of destined that I be here tonight, because as my brother knows, who's sitting out there at the Bressler table, partner in that firm, this past Saturday in Shul, we read Ki Tavo, the portion from the Torah, which was the portion when he and I were bar mitzvahed 4 years apart. So I was going to chant my Haftorah tonight, now that my voice has changed, but apparently that would be inconsistent with that which we've done here over the years. What I do want to share with you is not so much, candidly, an insightful vision on law, not necessarily an insightful vision on medicine, and the ethical question that arises is one that everybody has to interpret for himself or herself. But I'd like to share with you the dilemma that we face in the practical aspect and perspective of the topic, and to add to what perhaps is the conventional idea of this subject matter, I'd like to extend it to what's happening in healthcare and what those of us who participate every day in healthcare would like to see happen with this topic going forward. As you heard from Ken, we are a somewhat significant organization, mission-driven. We cover 9 counties in which there are 5 million residents of New Jersey. We view ourselves as having a responsibility to help those people enjoy their lives, whether they're sick or not. And when they do become sick, it's our obligation to make sure that they receive the most appropriate services delivered in the most and highest quality using the latest medical technologies. It's a simple enough mission. It takes 30,000+ people to do it, but the subtle issues of how it is that we're able to accomplish access to these services is what we're really here to discuss. One of the problems in our field, and I speak industry-wide, is a lack of transparency about that which we do. If it was any other consumer product, healthcare would be purchased by consumers who had a working knowledge of their needs and a more complete knowledge of that which they were purchasing in order to satisfy their needs. In our case, people are unsure of both of those topics. They're not certain what ails them in many cases, and they clearly can't understand, myself included as a layperson, what it is that might correct the condition or illness from which they suffer. And so what we have attempted to do over the years is come up with some model, helped of course by the jurisprudence that's been developed and the policy that finds itself into statutes and regulations, but somehow organize ourselves in a way that we can have an effective discussion about what is the best way and what is the best way to feel better, to access these services, and how is it that we can get our consumers to understand this difficult topic. And for us, it starts at the very beginning of who's going to make the decision. We know there's a patient, but frequently the patient is incapable of making that decision from the very beginning, quite frankly. In cases of babies born with less than 25 weeks gestational period, the parents are the decision makers. But that's only at that point. Years will go by and other decisions for that child may have to be made, at which point the parents would continue to attempt to make those decisions. Clinicians might disagree, and the involvement of courts and guardians may be necessary, all to try to determine who gets to make the decision. In later years, of course, people who have control over their mental and cognitive faculties should be making those decisions. But you wouldn't be surprised to know that family members frequently claim that notwithstanding the age and the accomplishment of the patient, he or she is incapable of making this decision. So finding the decision maker is not as simple as some of us may have thought going into it. Then there's the question of deciding what it is we should even say to the decision maker. As I suggested earlier, there is a level of inbred arrogance in our industry about how much a consumer can understand and whether the truth would be so intimidating emotionally that the patient couldn't possibly make the right decision. And in trying to gather up the substance, we have another sub-problem. Not all the clinicians on the case agree with one another. So are we going to tell the patient that which the surgeon would like us to tell the patient, or that which the medical physician would like to tell the patient, or what about the nurse, who frankly knows more about the case frequently than any of the licensed physicians? So now we have to decide who it is that will form the substance and how it is that will convey the substance to the decision maker, and how many of the family members want to participate in this decision-making process. Many of you are familiar with the fact that, and I'm sure many in this room have, living wills, directives that talk about what it is that each of us may want to have happen to us under certain circumstances. I think you might be surprised about how frequently those documents leave certain gaps in discussions and thinking, and of course, unless you update them literally every year for the latest medical technologies, they may be incomplete or certainly never would have considered what is possible today as opposed to the day that you signed it. But if we in fact have finally decided who's going to make the decision and what it is we're going to tell him or her or they, now the question is, how are you going to have the discussion? New Jersey is a jurisdiction where over 100 languages are spoken, representing multiple cultures, as I know you know. In fact, recently we were doing Zika posters for one of our institutions, and based on the clientele and the community, we needed them in 8 different languages. So if we're going to sit down and have a discussion of substance, we're going to have to recognize that foreign language issues, including all of the vernacular and subtleties, has to be taken into consideration before we even have comprehension on this most difficult topic. And then, of course, there is the bigger policy issue that I think we all wrestle with, and that is, what's the value in some of these services? Certainly, the clinicians in this room know, notwithstanding what they would like to believe and we as lay people would pray for, there is no certainty to predicting outcome. There is no way to insist that the intervention of a particular process or service is going to correct or forever cure a condition of a patient. And so now we are deciding what is of value and what isn't of value, and who should be getting the service and who should defer in terms of getting the service. Obviously, to all of us in this room, this sounds dangerously close to rationing, which in some cases is just felt to be unacceptable or un-American. But in the practical sense, everyone here will have to face a rationing policy in the near future unless something is done quickly. I will tell you, as we stand here, healthcare is financed by 2 particular sources: government and employers. Now, many of us in this room are employers. And if we stop paying for healthcare, and if the government reduces what it pays for healthcare, there is going to be an effective rationing program because people will not afford nor will they, in fact, sacrifice to get good healthcare services. And this is not some theoretical prediction I'm making, because the federal government has decided, as of a year and a half ago, that they are going to pay those of us who provide care based on value. Now, mind you, value may be an ethical consideration, it may be a financial consideration, and it certainly is a clinical consideration, but all of that is yet to be defined. And so what happens when the value coefficient to a particular service is determined to be something less than the government wants to pay for? We're going to have many patients who are going to go without services. You've all heard the stories in foreign jurisdictions where people of a certain age do not qualify for certain surgeries, or where someone who needs an MRI has to wait 3.5 months to get one. When people have to wait more than a day and a half, my office gets called. By some of you, by the way, I might point out. So the notion of our rationing, either explicitly or simply by design, the services that exist is a very real issue, because the government will not be able to afford open access, and what our employers are doing is allocating, conveying to the employees a greater financial responsibility to pay for health care, which ultimately translates to fewer people getting services. So in our world, where we live on the revenue of sick people, where we encourage as many tests as make sense in our view, where we're afraid in some cases to talk about real value, we face on a regular basis the ultimate decision in end-of-life care. Again, many that in this room have had to face the fact that a family member is suffering towards the end of his or her life and wonder out loud, are we trying to keep this person alive far too long? A dangerous, of course, and always controversial discussion, but I will tell you that New Jersey, when compared to every other state in the union, based on statistics and metrics that the scientific and medical and other communities feel are appropriate, is the worst jurisdiction in the United States when it comes to end-of-life counseling and end-of-life palliative and hospice care. Not that we don't have great care. We have wonderful care. But the truth is, our industry in New Jersey has the commitment to perseverance to maintain this life far beyond that which is done elsewhere. Now, whether that's of benefit to the patient and his or her family is a decision that people will have to make. But without that cultural change, we will continue to underserve, in our view, those who are facing end-of-life challenges in a significant way. All of that is what's being done right now. All of that needs guidance and support. All of that needs expert intervention to help us think through how we can in fact deal with those issues. But I would like to put on the table a body of concern for those of us in healthcare, and I don't believe it's yet been discussed to its fullest. The financial structure of healthcare is unsustainable. Its trajectory of cost is, as it's always reported in the various newspapers and magazines and public media, a rocket ship that is going to consume most of our available spendable dollars. We can be as efficient as we want to be, and we can aspire to, in fact, use resources more effectively. That won't change that trajectory, believe me. What we need to do is stop people from getting sick. And we're not going to be able to do that for everyone, of course, but the numbers and the models are pretty telling and persuasive. If we prune out from the people that we serve on a daily basis, those who could have forestalled their development of illness, those who could have averted conditions, we would in fact have plenty of resources for those who are going to get sick. And so what our industry has not done effectively is communicated with the public on how it is we can keep you healthy, not inviting you to get sick so we can treat you and make money. And this kind of commitment to the public service that I think is our mission is the new mission for what we consider to be a forthright healthcare system. And I'll tell you, it's not going to be easy, and it's a cultural change. I grew up listening to public service announcements in which we tried to convince ourselves not to throw litter on the ground. So we couldn't convince ourselves to throw garbage on the ground. How are we going to convince each other that there are lifestyle decisions that need to be made if you're going to be healthy? And failing to make those lifestyle decisions, you will develop certain conditions and illnesses, and you will in fact have to rely on the healthcare delivery system, and we're going to run out of resources. So whether you want to pursue this as a business plan or whether you want to do the right thing, we need to be able to convince people to make choices that'll make them healthier. So how do you do that without being incredibly intrusive into the lives of people? We've all been a party to the discussion about should it be broccoli or fast food? How big should the soft drink container be? These are issues that may be fun to discuss, but are truly at the base of public policy making, where some level of authority is going to have to say to someone eventually, if you're going to make bad decisions, it's a free country to do that, but your access to dwindling healthcare resources may be effective. And if that's the case, we may in fact find a number of people willing to make lifestyle changes over the generations so that we're not facing this problem. I recently sat, and I rarely do this, but I asked to sit in a focus group of consumers to talk about obesity. I am no poster child, obviously, for not being obese. But in this focus group, the professional moderator asked about obesity and asked, there were 6 people, what obesity leads to in terms of illness and condition. And we got the usual answers. We got, well, it's bad for your heart and you could develop cardiac problems. And then, of course, people said diabetes, which is a terrible, terrible disease. I'm sure many in this room understand that. And after that, no one said anything else about the consequences of obesity. And so this professional moderator said, what do you do for diabetes? Well, you change your diet, you take insulin perhaps. What do you do for cardiac problems? Obviously still a diet change, but you can get stents, you can get surgeries, you can do rehab. And then the moderator said, are you aware of the fact that obesity is one of the #1 markers for breast cancer? And it was like an electric shock went through the room. Cancer? Obesity and cancer? And he said, yeah. They said, I don't believe it. He was obviously prepared. And as I walked out of the room, I thought to myself, diabetes and cardiac is not enough of a threat. Cancer had everybody thinking about what he or she was going to eat for dinner that night. Now, that's a pretty nasty way to have to discuss the issue, but I have to tell you right now, it's what we face. Likewise, many of you probably know, based on children or grandchildren or other relatives, that pediatric asthma is a big issue, and many children suffer from it. We looked at the data in our emergency departments, and we found a list of pediatric asthma patients who you can predict come at a regular interval to our emergency departments. Pediatric asthma is an environmental issue in many cases, and so we asked the parents of these patients, if we could go to their homes and help them perhaps modify the living environment. Nothing drastic, maybe different window treatment, different carpeting, et cetera. I naively thought any parent who was asked if we could come and help, no charge, to make the environment better for his or her daughter or son would welcome the idea. Anything but a unanimous acceptance of the notion. Parents were unwilling, even though they knew that they would be back in the emergency department based on history in another 30 to 45 days, unwilling to let us intervene to that extent. And so what are we going to have? We will continue to have until some miraculous, perhaps, treatment or inoculation is developed. We are going to continue to see these children because there is no way for us to insist that we, in fact, get involved in helping these children out of these conditions. And the last issue that I will mention in a similar vein is senior citizens. One of the things that keeps hospitals in business are senior citizens who fall and break their hips. I'm sure you've all, again, know people where that's happened. And that's also predictable because in your living environment, if the teacup is too high and the lights are too dim and the throw rug is dangerous, we're going to have a senior citizen in our emergency department that seeks a hip replacement or something like it. We know what to do to seniorize that home, and it is a pittance compared to the healthcare problems that will arise because the patient had this episode. The Medicare program, which spends $900 billion financing healthcare, is not yet ready to finance our going into someone's home to make it safer so they don't have to pay for the hip replacement, the fracture, et cetera. What I'm describing to us tends to be an obvious shift in policymaking, understanding that it's intrusive, understanding that we have the obligation, we think, to help educate and become involved. But if we don't have a community of people who are interested, or we don't have policymakers who can help us, or if in fact what I'm suggesting is contrary to the culture that we want to maintain as a people and a country, then we will continue to strive to introduce the best quality services, the latest techniques, the latest technology. We'll certainly attempt to cover our costs by what revenue exists, but at some point I have to tell you, we are not going to have a sufficient resource base to make all of us better when we get sick. In our view, that is the challenge of how you discuss the delivery of healthcare in the coming eras. And I hope we will eventually reach that time in some generation when we can be as effective explaining how to live better lives and spend less time in how to choose which sickness service will be offered to those who've developed the illness. Thank you very much.